On today's World Insight, South Korea's president on a visit to the U.S. What's on the agenda? And a feast of movie buffs at the Beijing International Film Festival. We start a series of interviews with filmmakers from around the world, starting with an Icelandic auteur.
Well, honest film is a film that's not a propaganda film. It's just using a very honest, quiet, simple film language that everybody can understand.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has arrived in the U.S. to meet with President Donald Trump, the first meeting since the collapse of the second summit between Trump and Kim. According to Moon's office, the two leaders will discuss how to approach the DPRK's complete denuclearization and peace on the Korean Peninsula. But will Moon's visit indeed help the U.S. and the DPRK return to the negotiation table? Before our discussion, take a look at this.
The first meeting between South Korea and the U.S. after the Hanoi summit. Moon has been keen to meet with Trump to get diplomacy back on track. On Thursday, Trump and Moon are expected to meet at the White House to discuss what went wrong in Vietnam and how to move forward. For now, the problem is that Washington wants the DPRK to denuclearize before sanctions relief, while Pyongyang insists sanctions relief come first. This Monday, Moon pushed ahead with the appointment of the Unification Minister nominee, Kim Yoon-chol, who is well known for his pro-DPRK comments in books and on social media.
The development of the inter-Korean relations plays a role of assisting the talks between the U.S. and the DPRK. And if the talks between two countries goes well, then the inter-Korean relationship also improves. As we are in such a virtuous circle, it is highly necessary that we balance our diplomacy with the DPRK and with the U.S.-DPRK ties.
While Trump has generally taken a hardline approach towards negotiations, Moon has taken a more conciliatory stance. A potential fourth summit between Moon and Kim Jong-un is likely to happen. Seoul has indicated an envoy may soon be sent to Pyongyang to organize the summit. The South Korean president even offered to reopen the Kaesong Industrial Park and the Mount Kumgang tourist area and help to upgrade the DPRK's rail and road networks. With denuclearization diplomacy currently at a standstill, Moon is hoping South Korea's plan might get a more receptive hearing. Will Moon's visit be productive?
For more on the South Korean president's visit to the U.S., we are joined in Washington, D.C. by Jenny Town, the managing editor of 38 North. In Los Angeles, we have Jonathan Pollack, a non-resident senior fellow of the John Thornton China Center at the Brookings Institution, and in Beijing, Zhao Tong, an associate at Carnegie's Nuclear Policy Program based at the Carnegie's Tsinghua Center for Global Policy and Economics. I want to welcome to the three of you. Ms. Town, so what kind of role will President Moon this time be able to play? Since the last two summits, he played a constructive role, and yet we see a failure of the second round.
Certainly he wants to be useful and he wants to be encouraging the process, but we're really in uncharted territory at the moment. We've never had a negotiation process where you have two leaders actually doing the negotiating and not just signing off on something. So, you know, certainly President Moon is going to try to bridge that gap and try and convey some of the thinking on both sides to help mitigate the situation. But at the end of the day, you know, we're really now working with, you know, Trump and Kim Jong-un working directly together, negotiating directly together, and it's going to come down to now a credibility issue. And I think on the U.S. side, we do have somewhat of a problem on the credibility issue with Trump, who has now been held back by his cabinet and his administration on being able to make good on some of the things that he's willing to do and some of the things he's already committed to doing, such as the end of war declaration without conditions, And if the reports coming out of Hanoi are true, also then being willing to provide some sanctions relief, but his, Bolton and Pompeo seem to be more reluctant to do so. So if Kim Jong-un doesn't have confidence that Trump, no matter what he's willing to do, can actually implement, I think it's not, President Moon's role in all of this is still going to be very minimal to be able to bridge that gap.
But Mr. Pollack, on the other hand, the fact that 2 rounds of negotiations between the top leadership between DPRK and the U.S. did happen, and both sides eventually walked away from the second round, but still now there is the talk of the third round at least. It seemed to suggest some degree that both sides would love to commit to a continuation of the process of at least the talk, isn't it?
Well, perhaps. As we say, talk is cheap. Agreement is much harder. I think that this puts President Moon in particular in a very, very delicate position. His approval ratings have dropped very, very significantly. His entire presidency rests on his ability to move inter-Korean relations ahead, but he now finds himself caught in a process that he can't control. He may have helped start it, but now it's gone on to a very, very different level with an enormous degree of uncertainty about whether there's going to be any kind of a basis for future rounds of discussions. The other aspect is, and hope springs eternal, I suppose, but can President Trump, and maybe even more important, can Kim Jong-un continue this process of meeting periodically as if that is going to sort all things out and come to some kind of a binding agreement? There's increased skepticism about this, not just in the United States government, but perhaps also in some circles in North Korea as well.
Mr. Zhao, now for President Moon, many believe the inter-Korean relationship has been regarded by him as a knocking stone, shall we say, as part of the denuclearization process for negotiations at least. Now, how will the current round's failure be able to have an impact on what President Moon planned for inter-Korean relationship as well? Because he's being tested on several layers. One is about, of course, the domestic issues. Secondly is how is he dealing with the inter-Korean relationship. Thirdly, of course, how is he being viewed internationally during the denuclearization process, or at least the discussions about that. So these different layers, how is he going to fulfill his roles in these regards, Mr. Zhao?
Well, yes, indeed. The recent polling suggests that President Moon's domestic proving rating has dropped to only 41%, a new low. So he desperately needs some success in recovering inter-Korean relationship and improving DPRK-US relationship. As you suggested, I think it's very correct that the failed Hanoi summit really undermined inter-Korean relationship. Right after the concluding of the summit, South Korea reportedly immediately reached out to DPRK suggesting a quick inter-Korean summit. But North Korea turned that down. I think that's...
And also leaving the liaison office in Kaesong as well, even though coming back just a few days ago.
Yes. I think that's expected because North Korea needed time to take stock of what happened.
And also need to show the attitude.
Yes, and after they spend time deliberating what's the next step, I think they now have a new strategy. I think they are probably going to announce a major policy, including foreign policy, at the upcoming Supreme People's Assembly, which will start, which will happen very soon. So with that, I think President Moon now has a better chance of making inroad in reaching out to North Korea. And the first step, I think, is really for him to advocate for resumption of the inter-Korean economic projects, the Kaesong Industrial Park, the Kamgang tourist site.
Yes.
United States was not able to resume, to lift major sanctions at Hanoi, but may be open to allow such inter-Korean economic project to start first. So I think that's an opportunity that President Moon can make use of.
You know, one of the things that all of you have beautifully touched on is what's going to be the impact of the second round or the apparent failure of the second round having on the role of President Moon, but not just on President Moon himself, but also on the overall negotiation process and probably the blueprint for roadmaps of the future. Ms. Tao, on that point, there are so many different versions as to why the second round failed. We never know exactly because they were only two presidents. One is the leadership coming from DPRK, the other is the United States sitting in the room now. But according to some media reports, both sides were trying the so-called maximalist approach, meaning they tried to ask as much as possible for the second round of negotiation, and both sides did not have a smaller version of alternative to offer to the other side. And that's why they have to back down eventually from the second round. Now, Ms. Tao, will that be prepped with President Moon continue to play a constructive role here? Will he be able to convince either side to have that option, Ms. Tao?
Well, it's really difficult to see how he could bridge those gaps. You know, I think he's been very effective at the very beginning of the process to get both sides to the table. And you know, kudos to him for being able to do that and for starting this process. But what we have now, again, it's not a working level negotiation. They have some things they've worked out, but you have both Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump working as negotiators now. You know, and President Moon is not a neutral party to all this. He's not a neutral mediator. He has his own stakes in this. I think that really kind of also calls into question his credibility, even as he's passing messages, is how accurate are the messages being passed back and forth. Because if you oversell what either side is thinking in order to encourage the process, it also builds false expectations. And I think we've seen this, you know, leading up to the Singapore summit. But now that the U.S. and North Korea have direct channels of communication and are in direct negotiations with each other, I think it really marginalizes any persuasive power that President Moon has. And unfortunately, that has a huge impact on the inter-Korean process.
Yeah.
You know, the inter-Korean economic projects, it would be great to be able to restart them, but I think what we learned in Hanoi was that, you know, the North Koreans look at that as South Korea's already promised those things. So that's not something they want to negotiate with the United States about as well. Those commitments have already been made. It's up to South Korea to figure out how to do that. But, you know, North Korea wants something different from the U.S., and it wants something that the U.S. has to give, not something that South Korea is already committed to. And that's been part of the problem with this uncoordinated approach, with South Korea being very forward-leaning, has really undermined our collective bargaining power as a whole.
Very interesting you mentioned the different dimensions of the overall relationship among the three and probably beyond. That is why, Mr. Zhao, the people have reminiscence of the earlier rounds of six-party talks. As complicated, as challenging they were, it was a mechanism that put different parties together and they can listen to each other's words directly so that there will be not any misinterpretation of it, or at least not from the other party. So, Mr. Zhao, how do you think this so-called three dimension of process going on, and how will, you know, the U.S. side particularly, if we talk about the DPRK side, they are going to have an assembly talking about foreign policies, but at the same time, U.S. has to also provide certain kind of signals that Pyongyang could receive and be more confident, at least, even if it's a little bit, Mr. Zhao.
Yes, I think the problem is exactly the two major parties are not really talking to each other after Hanoi. The U.S. tried to suggest working level
They're
dialogues.
not talking to each other in the public domain. Now, we do not know whether they really talk to each other through other channels. That we don't know.
I agree, yes. They probably are, engaging privately, but certainly not at the level that they did before the summit. And here, I think, even though the United States suggested suggestions for reopening working level discussions, I think it really needs a mediator like South Korea to provide both parties a face-saving manner to re-talk to each other. I think both parties really they still have strong motivations to resume discussions. The time is on neither side's part, as long as North Korea is free to continue producing fissile materials, the nuclear threat continues to arise. So that's not a good picture for the United States. And for North Korea too. The North Korean main economic indicators looked good until very recently. There were some recent reports that the major state-run enterprises in Pyongyang are being shut down due to lack of supplies, materials, and financial resources. So time is not on Pyongyang side neither. So now I think it's good time for South Korea to step in between the two and offer a safe-saving manner by suggesting some middle ground. It's most important in terms of a middle ground proposal. I do believe they could come up in the form of a complete freeze of North Korea's programs in return for partial sanction relief from the United States.
Okay, that's an interesting word. Partial sanction relief. Now, how do you like that, Mr. Polak?
Well, there are several fundamental problems here. The first is whether or not North Korea, under any circumstances, would allow South Korea to serve as, if you will, its designated representative. North Korea is arguing that its battles here are with the United States, and that seems pretty clear. Everyone thinks they can, in a way, almost pull a rabbit out of a hat, as we say. But, I can imagine that President Moon will make the case to President Trump that give me, that is, give Moon Jae-in, a little running room, a little flexibility to see what I can do here to start a process. But this is a process that is going to be very, very separate, frankly, from any kind of meaningful steps on the larger question of denuclearization. And here again, I just think what has happened tells us time and again.
But, Mr. Polak, you haven't answered my question. That question is very direct and very simple. Whether a partial sanction relief is possible from the U.S. side. Well,
I don't speak for President Trump.
No,
what
you
I'm
don't.
saying
None
is
of
that
us
I think Trump, no, that's true. Trump might be inclined to give him a little wiggle room here. This is speculation right now. But Trump is more identified with this policy, the overall policy of trying to work with North Korea, than anyone else in his administration. And if he wants to do it, others in the administration may not be able to stop him. So it may be in a kind of a low-risk gesture that it's possible that Trump will give some kind of a green light to all of this. But it's an argument, yet again, to highlight that the controlling influences here are not in Seoul. However much Seoul wants to see itself as the indispensable party in all of this, it's going to be the calculations of the two leaders in North Korea and the United States that will really drive this process or bring it to a crashing halt. If I might also add, President Trump is entering the re-election campaign right now. And on that basis, he may be essentially content to leave things more or less as they are, believing that he's not boxed in. This may cause increasing economic pressures on North Korea. He may feel that a policy on the bigger issue of sanctions relief, true sanctions relief, is, if you will, a trump card that he holds.
I see.
And that North Korea may or may not be in need of activating.
Right.
So,
well,
we will see what happens when they meet. But the outlook here is very, very problematic right now, unless President Trump consents to some kind of gestures, however small they may be, that keeps this flickering flame from going out.
Ms. Tao, we are exactly waiting for that gestures coming from the Trump administration, particularly President Trump, no matter how small, as Mr. Pollack put it, they will be or it will be. But what could be those gestures? What is preventing President Trump from doing it in the immediate term? Is time really on his side, or will he use this as a beautiful campaign tool for so-called his achievements eventually? But as time goes by, things are not necessarily that he can control either. Ms. Moore.
Yeah, you know, I think Trump, like I said, has a credibility problem. And we saw this with what he said. You know, he reportedly promised an end-of-war declaration at the Singapore summit, has not been able to deliver on it because his administration has held him back and said, no, we need something for this. You can't give it unconditionally. I think you saw in Hanoi, the reports coming out of Hanoi was that, you know, the president was willing to consider some level of sanctions relief. You know, could they have prioritized sectors instead of everything that the North Koreans wanted, but certain sectors, and starting with a couple of things with snapback measures? That was possible, but it sounds like it was foiled again by his administration once they got into the 3-on-3 meetings. I think you saw him try and give this gesture after Hanoi of, you know, again, canceling another round of large-scale exercises. But then also this tweet about canceling the sanctions that had just been imposed the day before because we don't need them. I think that was a gesture to North Korea to say that we are serious about trying to negotiate. But then the fact that they took it back and tried to explain it as like, no, we're canceling future, I think, again, it shows that as much as he might want to do, that he doesn't necessarily have the power to do. And I'm sure the North Koreans are watching all of this and taking that into their calibrations as to what is possible with Trump in this administration. How much time does he have left? And I'm sure Trump would like some kind of win for the campaign trail. I don't know that he necessarily has the ability to enact that, and I don't know that he has the credibility to convince North Korea that he can do it either.
Right. Mr. Zhao, we only have 40 seconds left. Your thought, briefly?
I think President Trump showed his toughness in Hanoi, but he wouldn't want to push North Korea too hard. Otherwise, North Korea could resume at least some satellite launch activities by using its civilian rocket program. That can quickly escalate tensions and make us, you know, really unable to predict how you know, things would end ultimately. So I think there's a real possibility if North Korea is willing to commit to a complete freeze of its program, and then the American argument that lifting certain sanctions would help fund North Korea's nuclear program, that argument would be void. So I think there's a chance that the U.S. would be open to such interim deal with North Korea.
Very interesting. A lot of things going on, a lot of different calculations from different capitals for this one of the most complicated issues, geopolitically, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you so much for the three of you for joining us. Jenny Tao, Jonathan Pollack, last but not least, Zhao Tong. Thank you. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program, a feast for the movie buffs at the Beijing International Film Festival. We start a series of interviews with filmmakers around the world, starting from an Icelandic filmmaker, right after this break. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Beijing International Film Festival will kick off April the 13th. Over 260 films are set to be screened at venues across the Chinese capital. Ahead of the festival, we are bringing you a series of interviews with world-renowned film directors and screenwriters. Today, we start with Icelandic film director Fredrik Fredriksson. He grew up in Iceland in the 1960s and was largely influenced by American films. He started his filmmaking career with experimental movies and documentaries in the early 1980s. His feature, Children of Nature documentary, A Mother's Courage, Talking Back to Autism, and many other works have won international awards. These films are both deeply personal and strongly rooted in the culture of Iceland. They often depict characters at the crossroads of tradition and modernity. To you, what exactly are the honest films?
Well, honest film is a film that's not a propaganda film. It's just using a very honest, quiet, simple film language that everybody can understand. And I think that's the problem in the educational system all over the world. The education system, that they don't teach young children how to read film language.
You've been working with Hollywood a lot, with your film company.
Yeah, well, yeah, quite, yeah. Well,
so are they doing honest films?
No, absolutely not. I think American or Hollywood films in general are just like fast food. They are meant to kill time. And just like when you eat a McDonald's hamburger or fast food, you're just killing hunger for a short while, but you're not enjoying it. And very similar to American films and American fast food, if you get too much of it, you get sick. And you see it in the American society with all these shootouts. I think it's definitely very bad influence from the American films, because the violence is becoming very natural. If you see it constantly, people raping women or beating women and shooting people, it comes like a part of your own reality. And also the computer games are all about the same thing.
You have been nominated as for the competition of the best foreign films in Oscar Award. So how was that experience?
Well, it was nice, of course, and helped me a lot. The other film was sold already before that, but helped me to finance films in the future. So that was really helpful for not only for me, for the whole Icelandic cinema industry.
And you are the only one still so far from Iceland being nominated.
Yes, yes, yes.
You are having contradictories. On the one hand, you resent the so-called mainstream Hollywood big production and the so-called American recognition, but on the other hand, you said it yourself that once you got nominated for the best foreign film in Oscar, you got all the support that you could have, much better than before. So how are you working out those contradictions?
Well, I don't think about it.
You don't want to think about it, or you do not need to think about it?
I don't need to think about it. I'm very grateful for what they did, the Film Academy in Los Angeles. But on the other hand, I think it was very corrupt. For example, Zhang Yimou was there with me, and he had been nominated the year before also, 90 and 91, and everybody thought he would just being there to pick it up, but instead they gave the Oscar to an Italian film that Berlusconi produced and the now famous Weinstein distributed. So I think there was some kind of corruption going on.
You call that corruption?
I think so, because the quality of the film was nothing to compare to Raise the Red Lantern by Zhang Yimou. And also the Italian director thought Zhang Yimou would get the Oscar then. So.
What is the best way to make your products or your works available to the rest of the world?
Well, there is an old saying, the more local you are, the more global. And I think that's true, because also to be an honest filmmaker, you make films out of your own environment. And I compare to the food again. If you make your food out of what is in your environment, the lamp that is in your mountain or things like that, and growing up in your valley, that makes you that you're making food out of what you have. And I think it goes also with cinema. If you make films and tell stories that is front of you, and and you think have some kind of value for the rest of the world, then it just happened just by logic. It's a logic that people are more interested in those stories than trying to repeat Hollywood, for example.
Some say movie industry is a mirage. It's people larger than life, stories larger than real life, and directors that are larger than exactly who they are. Do you think so?
No, we are not bigger than life, of course, but when we are making the film, we are like God or some, because we make the decisions. So in that sense, we control a little aspect of our life and what we portray in our films. But in the end, there is always a big white color for death when the lights comes up in the cinema and the silver screen comes white. That's why we put so much white when we are trying to make death as a color.
355,000 people. How would that population size be able to support a movie market and support artists like you?
Well, in the old days, people paid triple price to see an Icelandic films. So then we became like a million, less than a million.
So how much would that be, the price of the ticket, when you say triple size?
Would be around $5, something like that.
Dollars?
No, a triple. Now it is not, but it used to be like a triple.
So like $15 to $20 a ticket.
Yeah. But that was really helpful then, but now most of our films are co-produced with Europe and Scandinavia and Canada sometimes.
The other thing is your relationship with nature. I mean, obviously, Iceland is one of the best places movie makers go when they want to get close to the Mother Nature. And you see big Hollywood blockbusters, in order to catch something about nature, they go to Iceland. So what is that relationship, I mean, for you, for example, to work with them about that?
Yeah, it's like Icelandic nature is so unpredictable because the weather changes are so fast. Yes. So we say we don't have a weather, we only have examples of weather. For example, we have this strange lava, so it's very easy to get imagination going on while you are alone walking in a lava field, for example, because you can see all kinds of creatures inside the lavas, you know, just like, so it's very natural for me, for example, to experience supernatural thing, like, for example, everyone in Iceland has seen a ghost, but if you see a monster, a sea monster, then you're a little, or a UFO, then you're a little bit crazy. But ghosts and elves, that's quite normal. So I think this has influenced me a lot, because I think, and I believe that supernatural is so natural for me.
But you know, when the movie industry come into town, what they want to take advantage of is the natural scenery. But on the other hand, it's very hard for them with such a big production, you know, people jumping in just for 1 or 2 days, be able to understand the rhythm and the real nature of the nature that you have over there. So to you, what is it? It's like fast food too?
No, usually they stay much longer, and there's a reason for the, you know, like guys like Tom Cruise, and if I take him as an example.
You have sample weather, you have sample actor.
Yeah, but he was immediately in love with the nature, so he knew what he was dealing with, for example. And same I can say about Russell Crowe, for example, in The Ark, Norway. I don't remember the name of the title of the film. I think that, but they used it very wisely, the landscape, I would say. But the films, is another story.
It's another story. It's another story, I could tell almost. So what about your way of using the nature?
Well,
you think you guys are different from them?
Yes, I like to shoot my landscape when you don't see it. In for example, in a foggy atmosphere, it's my favorite. When it's foggy.
Why?
It's so mystical and beautiful, and
there are many possibilities.
Yes, but we sometimes wait for the fog or the rain to come in, because if you shoot in a sunny, beautiful landscape, it is usually, in my case, it's not going very along with the story that I'm trying to tell. The beauty is also in the ugly landscape.
I like that. The beauty is also in the so-called ugly landscape. Yeah. Why is it?
Because it's different it's completely different, and it takes out these influences that I get from Icelandic nature, like the mystery, the supernatural stuff.
What is beauty and what is not? Sometimes it's evolving.
I think every individual has his own opinion about beauty.
How do you think, in a way, the nature is helping you as a filmmaker, besides the sea turtles and the sea monsters, in a way to help you to shape the story?
Yeah, I use it usually as in some of my films, not all. Sometimes there is no landscape or no nature. But I use landscape like a painter uses a frame. So just to frame it, and then I hope, and I'm not very successful, maybe often, hope the audience get what I'm thinking, how I use the landscape. But it's something that are influenced from German filmmakers like Werner Herzog and how he used landscape, but we were very yeah, different though, because when he came to Iceland '78, then he came from Brazil, no, Peru. He was making Fiskaralto, and a journalist from Icelandic radio asked him if he would see Icelandic films coming, or important Icelandic films coming in the future. And he said, no, I come from Lima, and there was so much pain on the streets of Lima that I would expect Peru would be making more interesting film than Iceland. And I was a film critic at that time, so I stood up and said, sorry, Mr. Herzog, we have the pain on the brain.
Are you still having it?
Yeah, that's the reason I make films, because when you see a film in your head, then, and you don't have the money to make the film, then it gets very painful to have it inside your head, and some filmmakers get crazy even, and so to get rid of it, you have to make the film. To get rid of the pain
is a beautiful thing sometimes.
Yeah. I'm not saying I have nothing against pain. Yeah. I think pain is very necessary for all filmmakers, and especially if they have pain for some minority people.
It's good to have feelings to begin with.
Yes, but also you have to give people a voice that don't have a voice.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot.
You're welcome.
About your works, and also your country, and an artist as a young man.
Oh, I do.
Thank you, sir, for being with us. Really appreciate it. Thanks. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Inside CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Inside team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.